The movie begins with drug lord Frank White being released from a prison after serving time for drug trafficking. He's picked up in a limousine by his female bodyguards, Raye and Melanie. Upon returning to his run-down neighborhood, Frank is dismayed by its worsening condition and resolves to take over the city's underworld by wiping out the criminals who took his place during his imprisonment. His goal is to dominate New York's criminal scene by eliminating rival factions, including the Colombian drug cartel and the Triads. Elsewhere in the city, Emilio El Zappa, a key figure in the Colombian prostitution ring, steps into a phone booth, only to be ambushed and gunned down in a hail of bullets. The attackers take his suitcase and leave his body behind, along with a newspaper announcing Frank's release. Meanwhile, in a nearby hotel room, Jimmy Jump is negotiating a cocaine deal with King Tito, another Colombian drug boss. Jimmy's nonstop talking irritates Tito, who suddenly hikes the price by 10%, throwing Jimmy off. With no other option, Jimmy agrees to the new terms and offers a suitcase as payment. But when it's opened, it's filled with tampons. In an instant, Jimmy and his crew draw their weapons and slaughter Tito and his men before they can react. After taking out the Colombians, Jimmy and the rest of the crew meet up with Frank in a suite at the Plaza Hotel. It's revealed that Jimmy's team was behind Emilio Zappa's assassination and that Frank is the mastermind behind it all. Jimmy greets Frank with admiration, reporting that both Zappa and King Tito have been eliminated and their cash and assets seized. With his rivals gone, Frank is now firmly established as the King of New York, celebrating his return to power with his loyal men. Jimmy expresses how long he's waited for Frank's return, saying nothing makes him happier. However, Frank is still bitter that Jimmy never visited him in prison. Jimmy explains that he didn't want to see a king behind bars and tries to soothe Frank's ego. Later, Frank heads out for dinner with his lawyer, Jennifer, and his trusted associate, Joey Dalesio. During the meal, Frank asks Joey to arrange a meeting with mafia boss Artie Clay. Afterward, Frank and Jennifer take a subway ride together. On board, they share a passionate kiss, hinting at a rekindled romance from before his prison sentence. When a group of African-American muggers approaches them, Frank casually reveals that he's carrying a gun, scaring them off. Instead of resorting to violence, he hands them a wad of cash and tells them to find him at the plaza if they want a real job. Meanwhile, Joey visits Little Italy to approach mafia boss Artie Clay, who's irritated by being disturbed during his poker game at his club. Joey delivers Frank's message, but Clay refuses to consider it. He makes it clear he won't deal with anyone who works with black people, stating he prefers doing business only with Colombians. In a show of contempt, Clay urinates on Joey's shoes and tells him to deliver that as his response to Frank. He then dismisses Joey without further discussion. In response, Frank, Jimmy, and the rest of the crew show up at Clay's club. Frank demands a cut of Clay's profits, arguing that the mafia made their fortune while he was in prison, and now it's his turn. Clay mocks Frank, prompting Frank to shoot him dead on the spot. As he leaves, Frank tells Clay's men that they're welcome to work for him at the plaza if they're interested. Later, Frank attends an opera and meets with the mayor of New York. He urges the mayor to keep a hospital in a low-income neighborhood open. The mayor says the city can't afford it. Frank offers to personally finance it, and the mayor tells him he needs to come up with $16 million by the end of the quarter. Frank is outraged, seeing it as a corrupt scheme to neglect the poor and divert resources to wealthy areas. The following night, Frank is confronted by detectives Roy Bishop, Dennis Gilley, and Thomas Flanigan from the NYPD Narcotics Unit. They drive him to a deserted lot and show him El Zappa's corpse in the trunk of their car, trying to pressure him into confessing. When Frank refuses, Thomas attempts to beat him, but Frank fights back and gains the upper hand. Dennis draws his gun on Frank, escalating the tension, but Roy diffuses the situation. With no concrete evidence against him, the detectives have no choice but to leave Frank behind in the lot. Then Frank sends Joey to Chinatown to approach Triad leader Larey Wong, who's watching a movie in a theater and has $15 million worth of cocaine for sale. Larey demands $3 million up front and an additional $500,000 once the drugs are sold. Later, Frank meets Larey at a hospital in a predominantly black neighborhood to discuss the deal further. Frank proposes a partnership to split the profits evenly.
But Larey refuses and demands that Frank decide immediately whether he wants to buy the drugs. Frank declines.
The next day, Jimmy and several of Frank's lieutenants stop by a fast food restaurant to buy food, where Jimmy charitably gives money to an elderly woman and her grandchildren. As he's about to leave, the police suddenly arrive and arrest him for the murders of the Colombians. It turns out that one of Tito's bodyguards survived and is now prepared to testify. At the Plaza Hotel, Frank is informed of his crew's arrest and immediately instructs his lawyers to secure their release. That night, Jennifer successfully gets them out. When Roy, Dennis, and Thomas arrive, they are enraged to see Jimmy and his crew walking free. Roy, however, is powerless to stop it. Later, in Chinatown, Frank and his men launch a brutal assault on the triads, wiping them out. They capture Larey Wong and force him to reveal the location of his drug stash. After executing Larey, Frank and his crew seize 220 pounds of cocaine hidden in MSG drums at his warehouse. A few days afterward, Frank uses the drug profits to fund a reconstruction of Community General Hospital in a predominantly black neighborhood. During a public ceremony, he's praised in a news report for his generous donation. Watching this unfold, the detectives are disgusted. Dennis vents his frustration, saying that while Frank lives like a king, they struggle on $35,000 a year. He argues that the justice system is rigged in Frank's favor due to his wealth, making it impossible to bring him down legally. Dennis then proposes killing Frank and staging it as a hit by a rebel gang. Roy, however, is powerless to stop it, but Dennis is resolute. Whether Roy supports him or not, he's determined to take Frank out. One night at a nightclub, Frank's crew is partying while Frank steps aside to make a phone call. Later, Joey arrives with a potential buyer from Los Angeles. After testing the cocaine, the buyer agrees to purchase it for $12 million, but proposes paying half upfront and the rest after selling it in LA. Frank refuses, insisting on full payment immediately. The buyer then suggests leaving one of his men behind and returning later with the cash. As the buyer and Joy prepare to leave, the buyer suddenly shoots one of Frank's guards at the door, revealing Joey's betrayal. Moments later, heavily armed men storm the club, triggering a violent shootout. Amid the chaos, Frank manages to help Jimmy escape in a car. However, one of the attackers clings to the vehicle. During the struggle, Jimmy rips off the mask, revealing he's a cop. Frank swerves to the roadside and kills the officer by ramming him with a roadside fire extinguisher. Dennis and Thomas witness the death of their fellow officer and immediately give chase. A deadly high-speed pursuit unfolds across the Queensboro Bridge, with Frank and Jimmy exchanging gunfire with the pursuing officers. All the cops are killed except for Thomas and Dennis. After shaking their tail, Frank and Jimmy split up. Jimmy eventually corners Thomas and shoots him in the chest, piercing his bulletproof vest. But before he can escape, Dennis appears and guns Jimmy down, then finishes him off with a shot to the head. Later, during Thomas's funeral, Dennis, overwhelmed by grief and guilt over the loss of his fellow officers, can't bear to stay through the ceremony. He quietly leaves and gets into his car. Just then, another vehicle pulls up beside him. To his shock, Frank rolls down the window and shoots Dennis dead before calmly driving away. Back at the plaza, Frank confronts Joey, who has been captured by his men. Joey repeatedly apologizes, but Frank demands to know why he betrayed him. Joey confesses that the police offered him money and promised entry into the witness protection program. In response, Frank coldly orders his men to bury Joey with the money, ignoring his desperate pleas for mercy. With Joey eliminated, Frank pays a visit to Roy's apartment. Holding him at gunpoint, Frank reveals he's put a $250,000 bounty on every detective involved in the investigation. He justifies his killings of Tito, Larey, Clay, and Zappa by claiming they were involved in trafficking women and children, something he couldn't tolerate even as a criminal. Frank forces Roy to handcuff himself to a chair and leaves for the subway. Bishop, however, manages to free himself and pursues Frank. The two confront each other inside the subway, guns drawn. Frank takes a bystander hostage and the shootout breaks out.
Roy is killed in the exchange. Wounded, Frank stumbles out of the subway and into a taxi in Times Square, clutching his bleeding side. As police surround the cab, Frank goes still, his fate uncertain as they close in. If you enjoyed this video, don't be shy to hit the like button, and if you disliked it, hit the dislike button twice just to be sure. It would be best if you watched the whole movie. Thank you very much for watching. Please subscribe for more videos like this.